She was the face of the French New Wave, an icon of elegance, rebellion, and brilliance. At just 21, Jean Seberg seemed untouchable, her beauty immortalized on the streets of Paris, her smile radiating from movie screens around the world. But behind that smile was a woman under siege. While the world fell in love with Breathless, the FBI began watching. While fans wrote her letters, federal agents opened her mail. While she posed for magazine covers, powerful men in dark offices planned her psychological destruction. By the end of her short life, Jean Seberg was no longer the darling of cinema, but a ghost haunted by headlines, surveillance, and betrayal. She died alone in a car on a quiet Paris street, her body undiscovered for days. The official cause was suicide, but the real question lingered: what broke Jean Seberg? This is not just the story of a Hollywood starlet who vanished. It's the story of how fame, politics, and power can conspire to silence a woman who dared to speak, and how the American dream turned into her personal nightmare. Jean Seberg was just a teenager from Marshalltown, Iowa, far from the glitter of Hollywood or the sophistication of Paris. Her only dream was to act. And like something pulled straight from a fairy tale, fate called her name. In 1956, legendary director Otto Preminger launched a highly publicized nationwide search for a fresh face to play Joan of Arc. Thousands of girls auditioned, but it was one 7-year-old Jean, bright-eyed, untrained, vulnerable, who won the role. She was chosen to play a saint, but the baptism of fire had just begun. Filming Saint Joan was brutal. The media mocked her performance. Critics were ruthless. The public turned cold. Most starlets would have crumbled. But Jean transformed. She returned to the screen in Bonjour Tristesse, revealing a new side: haunting, stylish, magnetic. And then came Breathless, about de Soufflé, 1960, the film that would forever etch her into cinematic history. With her cropped blonde hair, striped shirt, and American-French accent, she became the very definition of cool. Jean wasn't just acting anymore, she was redefining what it meant to be a woman on screen. Natural, spontaneous, alive. Paris embraced her, directors admired her, fashion houses adored her. She wasn't just an actress, she was a muse, a symbol of modern femininity. In France, she was hailed as one of their own, even while carrying her Midwestern roots with quiet pride. She married French novelist Romain Gary, became a mother, and seemed to have built a life of beauty and balance. To the world, Jean Seberg had it all: the fame, the fortune, the fairy tale love story. But underneath the glamour was a soul searching for meaning. Jean was never content with just being watched. She wanted to matter. She began speaking out, supporting civil rights, lending her voice and her money to causes she believed in. That's when the applause slowly began to fade, and the whispers, the dossiers, the threats began. In the late 1962nd, Jean Seberg's world was shifting. While she still graced magazine covers and walked red carpets, her attention was turning away from the spotlight and toward the burning issues of her time. She became an outspoken supporter of the civil rights movement. But Jean didn't just donate quietly. She stood publicly with the Black Panther Party, providing financial support and using her fame to amplify their cause. To some, she was brave. To others, especially the U.S. government, she had crossed a line. J. Edgar Hoover's FBI was running COINTELPRO, a secret counterintelligence program designed to discredit and destroy activists. Jean Seberg, blonde, beautiful, all-American, was seen as a dangerous threat because of who she chose to support. In 1969, the FBI launched a full-scale campaign against her. They wiretapped her phones. They followed her. They intercepted her mail. But the cruelest blow came in the form of a fabricated story. Agents planted a false rumor with Los Angeles Times gossip columnist Joyce Haber, claiming that Jean Seberg was pregnant with the child of a Black Panther leader. The lie made headlines. It spread across America and back to Europe, turning the press into a weapon against her. At the time, Jean was pregnant, and she was devastated. The stress and humiliation were unbearable. Just months later, she gave birth to a baby girl who died 2 days after birth. Jean was shattered. At the funeral, she placed her infant daughter's body in an open casket to prove the child was white, a tragic attempt to silence a lie that had already done irreversible harm. That moment, raw, intimate, and brutal, marked a turning point. The golden girl of Breathless had become a political target. Her public image, once curated by studios and fashion editors, was now smeared by government memos and media cruelty. And while the camera still flashed, something inside Jean had already begun to fade. After the public humiliation, Jean Seberg tried to hold herself together, but the damage was done. The rumor, the grief, the betrayal, it all clung to her like a second skin. And while the world moved on, Jean remained trapped inside her private hell. Her marriage to Romain Gary had already begun to fracture. The emotional toll of losing their daughter widened the cracks. Eventually, they separated, leaving Jean a single mother trying to balance a fragile mind and a fading career. The once vibrant actress who lit up Paris streets now drifted through hotel rooms and quiet apartments, looking for peace and finding only pills and paranoia. She suffered from chronic insomnia, depression, and anxiety. Medical reports noted her dependency on tranquilizers, barbiturates, and sleeping aids. Friends noticed the change. Her smile had dulled, her voice grew soft, and her eyes, those famous, soulful eyes, seemed lost in thought, or maybe in fear. She was convinced the FBI was still watching her, and she wasn't wrong. New files would later reveal that surveillance on Jean continued for years, even from abroad. The woman who once captured hearts across continents had now become a woman hunted by her own government and haunted by her own mind. Hollywood no longer called. Directors looked the other way. Offers dwindled. Roles were minor or exploitative. One by one, her lifelines were cut. In 1970, Jean attempted suicide. It would not be her last try. She checked into clinics, sought therapy, tried to reclaim her footing, but each step forward felt heavier than the last. Jean was still beautiful, still eloquent, still yearning, but she was also deeply, silently unraveling. To the outside world, it was a quiet fading. But to those close to her, it was heartbreaking to witness a woman of such brilliance being slowly extinguished, not by scandal or aging, but by despair that never truly let go. On the 30th of August, 1979, Jean Seberg disappeared from her Paris apartment. Her car, a white Renault 5, sat parked just a few blocks away, windows rolled up, silent under the late summer sun. For days, no one noticed. When her body was finally found, it had been there for over a week. The smell of gasoline lingered, pills scattered on the floor, a bottle of barbiturates, a note written in French, "Forgive me, I can no longer live with my nerves." She was 40 years old. The world responded with muted shock. A brief flurry of headlines, a quiet funeral, another lost star. But to those who knew her story truly knew it, Jean's death was more than a tragedy. It was a consequence. Her ex-husband, Romain Gary, publicly blamed the FBI for her death, declaring that the smear campaign had pushed Jean beyond the brink. Years later, official files confirmed what she had claimed all along. She was targeted, watched, humiliated, and psychologically tormented by her own country. And yet, no one was held accountable. The final image of Jean Seberg was not on the silver screen, not in a photo shoot, not at a film festival. It was a woman alone in a car, parked on a Paris side street, consumed by the silence she had tried so hard to escape. The girl who once played Joan of Arc, who once stood fearless before cameras and crowds, had been broken not by failure, but by power misused and truth ignored. In the end, Jean didn't vanish. She was erased. Jean Seberg may be gone, but her legacy refuses to fade. Today, her image lives on in black and white stills from Breathless, studied in film schools, mimicked in fashion campaigns, celebrated in retrospectives. But those curated frames tell only half the story. Because Jean wasn't just a screen icon, she was a woman who dared to speak when silence was safer. At a time when most actresses were told to smile and stay out of politics, Jean took a side. She believed that her voice, her money, her visibility could make a difference. And for that, she paid the price. Her targeting by the FBI remains one of the most egregious examples of state surveillance against a civilian artist. What they did to her wasn't just an invasion of privacy, it was an erasure of personhood. Jean's story has become a cautionary tale of what happens when the machinery of power turns against an individual, when fame cannot protect, when truth becomes dangerous, and yet her resistance still echoes. Jean's story has become a rallying point for activists, feminists, and artists alike. Her support of the Black Panther Party, though vilified then, is now seen as an act of moral courage. Her downfall is now viewed not as a personal failing, but as the result of systemic cruelty. In 2020, the film Seberg, starring Kristen Stewart, reintroduced her story to a new generation. It reminded us that behind every glamour shot is a deeper truth, often unspoken. Her life raises questions we're still asking. What do we owe to truth? What happens when governments decide who deserves peace and who doesn't? And how many Jean Sebergs have we already forgotten? Perhaps the most haunting part of Jean's legacy is this. She tried to use her fame to protect others, but in the end, no one protected her. Jean Seberg didn't die because she was weak. She died because she was watched, because she loved too deeply, because she believed the truth mattered. They tried to silence her with rumors, with wiretaps, with fear, but silence does not erase a life. And now, decades later, her whisper still cuts through history, reminding us that the brightest lights cast the longest shadows. She was more than a face, more than a scandal, more than the woman in the car. She was Jean Seberg, and her fall was never hers alone.